Do not be afraid of the tractors. They won't hurt you. On the outside, that is. Hello, listeners. Welcome to Iowa. Our top story today, the annual City Appreciation and Appeasement Parade. That's right, it's that time of year again, when all the city's residents gather together in joyous celebration in a desperate attempt to avoid the wrath of the shadowy winged figures roosting atop the Capitol building. We don't know what they are or why they're here, but we do know they love cotton candy. And who doesn't? Today is the one day a year when every member of the community comes together in friendship and cooperation to celebrate Iowa City's rich cultural heritage. Today's parade is the result of weeks of hard work and planning, so make sure to come out and have some fun, make some friends, eat some funnel cake, and remember, attendance is mandatory. But before we get to the festivities, a few community announcements. First, the City Council would like to advise all citizens to avoid the Casey's on Dubuque Street until further notice. Not for any particular reason, of course, and it's certainly nothing to be concerned about. Just don't go there, alright? Just don't. Next, local business Molly's Cupcakes has announced it is expanding its market to include cupcakes. This is a notable departure from the norm for Molly's, whose wares traditionally include packs of gum, various supernatural instruments, and funny lawn ornaments, and as a result it has raised criticisms from some longtime customers. But personally, I am excited about this new development. I can't wait to get one of those fancy new cupcakes, whatever they might be. Finally, a lost dog has been found roaming the edges of the hinterlands south of town. It is a black Cocker Spaniel, and according to the tag on its collar, its name is Sparky. Also, it talks, and the things it says are terrible. Terrible, terrible indeed. If that sounds like your dog, please contact the animal shelter immediately. And now back to our live coverage of the City Appreciation and Appeasement Parade, where the festivities are just kicking off. Leading the parade, as always, is the Iowa City High School Marching Band, followed closely by the Iowa City High School Rhythmic Chanters, proudly chanting the words of our state song. "Oh, Iowa, gladly would I lay down my life for thee. No, really, I would. Yes, seriously, cross my heart and hope to die. And no, I'm not crossing my fingers, I really mean it." What a classic tune. Next comes the VFW's float, honoring all our veterans who have so nobly given their lives in the fight to keep the mutant men underground where they belong. And after them is the Boy Scouts of America. They're handing out candy to children in the crowd, and they've got their uniforms on, and oh, is that a little boy dressed up as Smokey the Bear? Oh, that is adorable! I always loved the Boy Scouts as a child. I still remember the first time I toppled a corrupt foreign regime to earn my political sedition badge. Good times. We'll be back with more live coverage of the parade soon, but now, a word from our sponsors. A man is standing in a cornfield. You do not know the man. You do not think that he knows you, but how can you be sure? He is a tall man. He towers over the corn stalks around him, dressed in a thick black overcoat. The field sways gently in the breeze, but the man remains utterly motionless, as does his overcoat. He is staring up at the multitude of stars in the sky above him. So many stars, you notice. You wonder if there's more than usual. You hope desperately that there aren't. You decide to approach the man, although you aren't sure why. Perhaps you approach to ask how he isn't sweltering in such a thick overcoat in the hot summer air. Or perhaps you approach simply so that you don't have to turn your back on him, on this presence in the cornfield. Whatever the reason, you approach him quietly, very quietly. That is the one thing you do know for certain. It is vitally important that he does not see you. You step gingerly, each placement of the foot a product of intense calculation and planning, eyes frantically searching the ground for broken sticks and twigs which could alert the figure to your presence. Your progress is agonizingly slow, as you only dare to move when the wind is at its peak and can cover the sound. You don't know how long you've been here. It might have been minutes, but it feels like hours. The closer you get, the taller this being seems to grow. It looms high above you now, nearly 10 feet tall, all but blocking the moon's light. It is only by the light of the thousands of stars that you're able to keep moving forward. Suddenly, a cow bays, distantly but clearly. A great moo splits the evening air. It's joined by another, lower and more urgent, and then another and another. You don't know where they are coming from. There isn't a barn or pasture in sight. In fact, you realize there isn't anything in sight. The cornfield extends as far as you can see, from one horizon to the other, a never-ending sea of gold and green waving aimlessly in the night. The mooing stops, and for the first time you see movement from this great black figure towering over the rest of the world. At first you think you're imagining it, but no. Slowly, so very slowly, the overcoat is shifting. One long appendage separates itself from the torso and rises into the air. A hand, gray and rotten-looking, pokes out the end of the sleeve. Hardly daring to breathe, you watch it raise high over the creature's head, following the direction of its gaze. One knotted, spindly finger points to the sky, and then, as if an unseen switch had been unceremoniously flipped, everything, the moon and the stars and the many other strange lights in the heavens, goes dark. You turn and run. You are blind in the pitch-black expanse of night, the sky an empty void above you. Sticks snap beneath your feet and grab at your ankles, and the stalks of corn seem to press in tighter than before, but you press on. You think you hear movement behind, the great unholy figure crashing effortlessly through the field. You imagine enormous willowy legs as lifeless and horrible as the hand, taking great strides high over the reaching ears of corn, each step covering acres of land in a single bound. The mooing has started again, louder and angrier now. Thousands of irate bovine voices screaming in your ears. The field is growing more aggressive, egged on by the great baying. It grabs wildly at your clothes and at your feet, and you have to shove the stalks aside to keep moving forward. Behind you, the thunderous crash of enormous footsteps becomes unmistakable, accompanied by the cries of countless cornstalks perishing violently under the thing's paces. It feels like you've been running for hours. Your legs ache, your chest heaves desperately, and your tears sting your cheeks in the suddenly cool breeze. Finally, you can go no further. You feel the man's fingers, horribly dry and slender, wrap around your torso, and you know it's over. You go limp in his clutches, and you are raised high into the air, hundreds of feet off the ground. For the first time, you are thankful for the embrace of darkness, so that you are spared the sight of this creature's face. You can only feel its hot, foul breath on your skin and its burning gaze as it inspects you closely. It brings you closer, so that the stench of its breath is almost unbearable. Terror wells deep in your heart, stifled only by morbid relief that this will all be over soon. You close your eyes, unable to scream for the lack of air in your lungs. And then it speaks, a wretched, hellish voice, which seems to come from deep within the earth itself. Its cracked lips scratch painfully against your ear as it whispers to you out of the darkness. Drink milk. And now we return to our live coverage of the City Appreciation and Appeasement Parade. During the break, the parade was paused briefly as the result of a sudden yet tragic Shriner accident. But now the streetways have been cleared and the witnesses silenced, and our celebration is back on track. Our next float is for the Iowa City Association of Indigenous Peoples, celebrating the native tribes who lived here long before it was conquered by our state's founder, Steve Iowa. They are playing traditional instruments, such as handcrafted marimbas and bassoons, and screeching horribly, while I and every other onlooker avert our eyes, as is polite and necessary for survival when dealing with these proud peoples. Listeners, I'd like to take this moment to talk to you all about our history. How much do you really know about your own history? What about the history of the people around you? On this day of citywide cultural celebration, take a moment to learn a little more about those close to you. Ask them where they're from. Ask them how they got here. Ask them how they found out about this place. Ask them what they were doing last night at around 8 p.m., and ask them to be very specific. These are good things to know, and once you know them, you should report them to the City Council as soon as possible. Listeners, do we have a treat for you now? A very special guest has just entered the parade route. That's right, listeners. It's our city mascot, Herky the Hawk. He's been roused from his slumber deep within the bowels of the Capitol building just to grace this parade with his presence. Wow. Look at how he towers over the rest of the parade, shaking the ground beneath him with each immense footstep. Look at his great golden feathers fluttering in the breeze and his long tendrils waving lazily to the citizens below him. Oh, he is simply awe-inspiring. But what's this? Herky has stopped in the middle of the parade route. His handlers are poking and prodding him as hard as they can with their long handling spears, but to no effect. His beautiful avian face is hard to read, but he seems mournful. This isn't good, listeners. The parade has halted in its tracks, unable to proceed, causing mass hysteria and panic to break out through the streets. The other parade participants are growing irate and even violent. The Boy Scouts have already declared war on the indigenous peoples, and the casualty rate is climbing rapidly. The shadowy winged figures atop the Capitol building are fluttering their wings restlessly and chattering to each other in their strange alien language. Listeners, I fear the worst if order isn't retained soon. Herky is moving again now, but he is not following the city-approved parade route. He has shrugged off his handlers and is making his way across downtown without heed for house or home. He crashes right through everything in his path, and it is all the citizens can do to scurry to safety in his wake. He crosses the river in 2 effortless steps, the water barely covering his scaly talons, and then he's making his way steadily towards the border of Iowa City. I'm getting reports now that Herky has reached the hinterland south of town, and he has stopped. He has turned to face Iowa City one last time, surveying the destruction he has wrought, much greater than the typical destruction of a city appreciation and appeasement parade. And as he looks on over the ruins of our fair city, one enormous teardrop forms in his eye, runs down his jagged beak, and falls to the ground beneath him, completely flooding several acres of farmland. Then he unfolds his immense 1,000-foot wingspan, and with a few powerful beats, he rises into the sky. He hangs over the city for a moment, as if suspended by some impossibly strong cosmic rope, and then, in a flash of gold, he is gone. The whole city sits in shock for a moment, staring open-mouthed at the sky above them. And then all the citizenry bursts into thunderous applause. Wow, listeners. What a show! I didn't think they would ever be able to top last year's parade, but those crafty city planners always find a way. Just incredible. Back on the parade route, the rioting has stopped, and a tense ceasefire has been brokered between the Boy Scouts and the indigenous peoples. Instead, raucous celebration has erupted throughout the city. Strangers are dancing joyfully together, while others chant the ancient rites of gratitude for all to hear. Once again, the whole community has been brought closer together within our culture, and the shadowy winged figures atop the Capitol building could not be more appeased. It has truly been the most successful city appreciation and appeasement parade in the history of Iowa City. That's all for our show today, listeners. Tune in next for the vague discomfort of feeling like you forgot something and being unable to remember what it was. And remember, our culture is always something to be celebrated and never ashamed of, except for on city-mandated Shame Day, which is coming up in about a month. Good night, Iowa. Good night.